Story 1. I had been hurt and abandoned by many friends and family. I wanted a fresh start. I didn't realize that I would be stuck in that pain without any closure. Story 2. My ex was financially abusive and controlled every penny I earned. One day, I snapped, packed my essentials while he was at work, and never looked back. Living alone was terrifying at first, but now it is the best decision I have ever made. Story 3. When everyone offered me advice that I couldn't relate to, I decided to listen to what my own mind had to say. Story 4. My mother is a narcissist, and my father simply allows it. I left home at 19. She swore I would be back begging for help, and that she would not help me. Well, guess what? I am 32 and have never seen or spoken to her again, nor do I plan to. I have also never asked for any kind of help. She knows nothing about me. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and sadly, she was told about her last year by a family friend by accident. That was a lot. I needed to vent. Thank you. Story 5. Family. Every time I come back home, I'm reminded of what it feels like living there. I think to myself, I am glad to have grown out of this. Story 6. I like that when I leave, everything is how I left it when I come back. Additionally, I could finally afford to do so. Story 7. I only do my own dishes. I don't have to cover my food in hot sauce to prevent people from eating it. The thermostat isn't left at an expensive setting with nobody home. I clean my own mess. There is nobody to wake me up or keep me up all night. Nobody wants to borrow my things without any intention of getting their own. My belongings are safe because there are no guests unless I am present. Everyone needs to live alone at some point. You learn a lot about yourself and how much you can tolerate from others, especially when you don't have your own escape or haven. Story 8. Finding bliss in solitude and having a place of my own to call home is truly rewarding. The joy that comes from knowing you accomplished your goals independently is an amazing feeling. Story 9. For me, it was not done on purpose. I felt screwed over by so-called friends. I sobered up, looked around at what I was dealing with, and felt really foolish for falling into this trap. Story 10. My roommate was going through my belongings regularly and allowing people to use my room when I was out of town without telling me. Story 11. I had gotten out of an abusive relationship and needed to work on finding myself and building an offbeat career. This worked out, and I couldn't be happier. I don't ever want to live with other people or even be around them. I want to move to the woods and keep working there. The city is overrated. Story 12. I was sexually assaulted. It's easier to feel safe knowing I am the only person who has the key to the door. I kept a baseball bat by the front door and by the window where the air conditioner is. I now live in a large, messy house with several other people, but they are individuals I trust with my life. Story 13. I always wanted to renovate an old cottage. When I lost my job, I took the plunge and became the village hermit in a small place in the northwest of Ireland. It was the best decision I ever made. Story 14. The realization that my happiest years of adult life were spent in a place of my own. I had girlfriends with whom I would spend weekends and friends I would visit, but I had my own space. Story 15. I really enjoy my alone time. I love my family and friends, but it can be emotionally and mentally draining to always be available. I like living alone because it allows me to recharge. I now feel that spending time with loved ones is a blessing and not a chore. Story 16. Divorce. The first 6 months alone were tough, but nearly 25 years later, I still live alone and would never live with anyone again. Story 17. I had been living in shared accommodations for a few years, none of whom I knew prior to moving in. One morning, I walked into the bathroom I shared with 2 others and found the toilet unflushed after one of them had used it in a disgusting manner, and there was a used tampon on the floor, far from the bin. That was the last straw for me after years of dealing with many unpleasant and dirty housemates. I am sure I wasn't perfect either, but I was never filthy like that. I was paying $250 a week to live in a small, windowless room, and I refused to tolerate such filth. I found my own rental soon after, and it was a great relief. Story 18. Disgusting experiences with people all around. I gave them another chance, and it was 10 times worse the second time around, so I'm trying to live on my own again. Finding jobs with minimal human contact is proving quite difficult for now, but that makes it even more important to at least live alone. Story 19. Everyone around me is trying to help me solve the issues they have with me, while ignoring the reasons I am the way I am. Story 20. My sleep schedule is consistent. I am a morning person, waking up at 6 a.m. even on weekends, but the rest of my family hates waking up early. Story 21. Food security, the safety of my belongings, the well-being of my pets, and the mess they left behind. Story 22. I was hired for a job in Switzerland, so I moved there from Florida. After my contract ended, I returned and found a job in the Washington, D.C. area. I've been hoping to find a job closer to home, but opportunities are not easy to come by. Even if I changed fields, I would still prefer to live independently rather than move back in with my parents or relatives. Story 23. I paid thousands for months, so I thought if I could manage to support a household of 5, then I could also take care of myself. I moved hours away from my family to be closer to my best friend at the time. However, I ended up moving again, this time with my chosen family, my now husband. Story 24. My family is difficult to deal with, but I don't have enough money to live on my own yet. That's a reason, though. Story 25. The smell of marijuana filled the air. Everyone was smoking, drinking alcohol, and using marijuana. I couldn't tolerate it any longer, so I began saving for a deposit at the age of 14. I left as soon as I was legally able to do so. Story 26. I have been chronically single and had roommates for 11 years, usually random people, with 4 sharing a bathroom in a high cost of living city. Having my own bathroom for the first time in my life is amazing. Story 27. My ex was very controlling about everything, from what I could wear to whom I could talk to. The day I finally moved into my own place felt like taking my first real breath in years. Now I play Taylor Swift at 3 a.m. and leave my dishes in the sink if I want to. Story 28. My parents offered to buy me a house, which would be a good investment for the farm and provide a reliable tenant for them. There was a chance it could become mine someday through farm inheritance, but then they kind of didn't. You can't really be upset about it because what? Boo-hoo, my parents didn't buy me a house. Still, after all that, I felt kind of unwelcome. They did help me out by providing a plot on the farm to set up a static caravan, and the rest was up to me. Now I have my own space, but I still get to enjoy the freedom of the farm. I'm on the same site as work and assist my dad by looking after the house and his dogs whenever he goes away, which is fairly often as he's gradually transitioning into retirement. Story 29. At that time, there was a lot of chaos in my house. I felt scapegoated frequently. I grew tired of being the outlet for family issues and decided to move out. Story 30. I have a dog, which makes it easier, and I wanted to experience my own independence for a while before I get married one day. Story 31. My roommate used to sleepwalk and cook full meals at 3 a.m. One night, I found her making spaghetti in her sleep, completely unresponsive. When I woke up to burning smells for the 3rd time that month, I knew it was time to live alone. Story 32. I am an only child and have never shared anything. I was not about to start either. My first roommate was my husband. Story 33. Flatmates went through my room to look for something that had gone missing. They didn't tell me, and I noticed things had been moved. Only when I confronted them did they admit to it. Had they asked, I would have invited them in. Maybe they should have asked their friends. I moved out the next day and didn't care about losing the rent money. Story 34. I lived in my grandparents' house with my mother and her siblings. My aunt, who is only 11 years older than I am, would constantly complain about every little mistake I made, yet she could not discipline her own daughter. Sometimes I did not even know what I had done wrong. I would just sense something was off because she would start giving me the silent treatment. I tried not to let it affect me, but it made me overly cautious with every move I made, and it was emotionally draining. As soon as I had enough savings, I moved out of that house. Story 35. I was asked to pay for my own groceries by my parent. I was crushed. After a lifetime of abuse, being quite young, and having no money, I really felt the lack of support and couldn't take it anymore. It wasn't about the money. It was about the lack of maturity and good intentions surrounding that conversation. So much had happened that it was just the last straw. Even though I had little to nothing to my name, I thought that if I was going to be alone in my family, I would be alone on my own terms. I left a few weeks later and never looked back. Story 36. People can be rude, obnoxious, and self-centered, unable to admit they are wrong. I lived in Tokyo for 15 years, surrounded by millions of polite people. Even if they dislike you, they are still courteous. After spending 2 years in 2 lightly populated cities filled with selfish individuals, my deepest dream is to have a cabin in the woods back in Japan. The United States has lost all civility. The South, even during its most hypocritically racist period, prided itself on manners, but that is clearly gone. They chose racism and extremism over civility and genuine Christianity. It's pathetic, and they will never realize it. They will destroy everything decent about America, tearing it down brick by brick. In the end, as they lie in the dirt and rubble, they will blame the clean crowd of liberals, independents, and never-Trumpers who tried to stop them for over 12 years, saying, "This is all your fault." When they die and meet St. Peter and Jesus for their life review, they will see in excruciating detail what terrible people they were and how they broke every single rule laid down for them. They will just scream, "But I went to church, and I wore some pins. I made potato salad. Fake news. Fake news." And they will worship the former president in hell. Perhaps Satan should just leave them to it, return to heaven, and resign, as they revel in pain and never learn. Story 37. I waited too long for my partner to get their finances together. I feel like my life is slipping away as I wait for someone who doesn't seem to want the same changes. Story 38. I was living with a man and his girlfriend. At some point, it became clear that they resented the lack of privacy, which caused friction in other areas of our relationship, such as getting upset with me over things that would normally not be a big deal. It also became difficult to date when I brought a girl back to a living room full of men smoking and watching sports. I got a raise and realized I made enough to live on my own, so I moved out. Story 39. I started my first job after college, earning a decent income, and realized I no longer had to live with 4 other roommates. It was the best decision ever. There were no more passive-aggressive notes about dishes or fighting over bathroom time at 7 a.m. Story 40. It's fantastic. Life is always broadcast on the U channel. However, you must truly enjoy that programming. Story 41. My roommate had her long-distance boyfriend stay for 3 weeks without informing me in advance. She only gave me less than a week's notice, and she repeated this twice. He was quite messy and somewhat arrogant. She did not see an issue with the length of his stay, and I frequently had to remind her to ask him to clean up after himself. I realized that I should just live alone and avoid dealing with these situations. Story 42. Roommates often avoid paying their bills. Initially, they say they don't have money this month and ask you to cover for them. As soon as you do this to stay out of trouble with creditors, they see it as an opportunity and never pay you back. Why even have them? I should just get my own place. Story 43. I am very sensitive to the cold, and I cannot relax in anything below 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Being too cold for too long makes my whole body hurt for days afterward. I can tolerate temperatures as low as 65 degrees Fahrenheit for a few hours if I am continuously doing moderate to vigorous cardio to stay warm. I grew tired of fighting over thermostats and spending my entire day wrapped in an electric blanket, unable to do anything. Yes, I have consulted a doctor, and my thyroid tests consistently come back normal, so there is nothing actually wrong with me. I eventually concluded that I am simply incompatible with cohabitation with every other human being on the planet, and that is okay as long as I earn enough money to afford rent on my own. Story 44. My roommate disconnected the power. I moved into a small studio with all my belongings and 2 cats, measuring 350 square feet. It was enjoyable. Story 45. My sister kept arguing with me about my use of Instagram. When I returned home, she continued to be aggressive, hitting my door with a hammer, throwing metal bath trays at me in my room, and pouring water on me. It became overwhelming as she was too involved in my life while refusing to let me be involved in hers. Story 46. It's about independence, peace, and discovering who I am outside family pressure. It's not always easy, but it's totally worth it. Story 47. I'm tired of supporting others. I'm tired of cleaning up after them. Sometimes I want to be left alone. I'm tired of having to compromise. I can tell you it's amazing. I can go out when I want and invite people over. But I will never again be trapped in my own house with someone I can no longer stand. Story 48. My dad slammed my door in a drunken rage, causing a mirror to fall off the wall. He then yelled at me for destroying his property. A decade later, he expected me to leave my husband and move back in to take care of him. That did not happen. Story 49. Horrible housemates. I can deal with unorganized people, but I can't handle those who keep the kitchen and the toilet unclean. In my current flat, I have both areas clean. Story 50. I no longer have to come home from an exhausting double shift to find a loud party at my house. When I work at night, I don't have to worry about disturbing anyone when I come home at 4 a.m. I no longer have to hope that someone hasn't left a mess in the shower before I use it. Nobody else is touching my fridge, my cabinets, my food, or my cigarettes. Story 51. I moved to a new town for work. I didn't know anyone who lived close enough to share a place with. I have lived alone for 16 years and I like it just fine. Story 52. I reached 18. My mother was no longer receiving child support for me, so she was going to start charging me rent. Therefore, I moved out. Story 53. I moved out because my parents do not have internet access and did not give me any privacy. My dad slept on the living room floor, and I could not walk past him without waking him up. I had some great roommates, but some of them were very passive-aggressive, so eventually, it was nice to live by myself when I could afford it. Story 54. Freedom is the taste of it, whether you mess up or get it right. You learn the hard way, navigate things on your own, and simply live at your own pace. Story 55. If I hadn't left my hometown and moved to Bangalore to live alone, I could never have forgiven myself. I only gave control of my life to my parents for 10 days after college, and I regret that. I am glad to be here in Bangalore, alone and lonely, rather than being involved in the drama. Story 56. I have been hurt and let down by toxic roommates. They took my food, blamed me for things, and recorded me in my own home. It was too much. Story 57. My family is toxic. I'm single again. 2 of my close friendships ended, and my good friends live across the country. I haven't had good recent experiences with roommates, and I need peace and want to live by my own rules. Story 58. Adulting. Regardless, I have already experienced living with family in a dorm and with roommates. I enjoy this phase of life a lot, living by myself. Story 59. When a child was forced upon me, it was overwhelming. I had to leave and stayed away for 8 months. During that time, I did many things I am not proud of, but I learned to forgive even the worst actions I could imagine being done to me. Story 60. The people's inability to wash dishes and the fact that I am a creature of the night while the lights are still on at 4 a.m. Now I have a sleepy girlfriend, and I love her. My inner owl is protesting, though. Story 61. I needed distance from my parents. They mean well, but they could be overbearing. Even in my mid-20s, I wasn't really allowed to make many of my own decisions. I needed the independence. Story 62. I fear the thought of living by myself. It is impossible for me to live alone. The thought itself chills me. Story 63. I moved out at 18. My parents were loving but strict. I didn't want roommates. I am a quiet person and wanted a place to myself. Story 64. I felt like I needed my own space to grow and understand myself better. Sometimes being alone is exactly what I need. Story 65. I lived with my bandmates. One of them became unemployed when their research grant ran out and started drinking heavily, taking drugs, selling drugs, and experiencing intense trips while driving on the interstate. Many unfamiliar people were showing up at the house, presumably to buy drugs. However, those individuals knew more people than I did and socialized more. One Saturday morning, I returned home after staying at my girlfriend's and discovered that someone had been in my room, slept in my bed, or something similar. Freaked me out. Nothing was missing, but this invasion of my space was not okay. I later found out it was the newly unemployed person having an existential crisis. For the next 18 months, I had my own place. Story 66. I was a difficult housemate, so I moved out and realized that living in my own house was better. Story 67. I don't like sharing. I don't like the thought of someone else using what I'm about to use, like towels, bathrooms, and cups. Story 68. In 2019, my partner and I were at a crossroads. We were living together and he wanted to continue renting. I wanted to buy a house before rates went up. There was no compromise, so I did it by myself with just my income. At the time, I would have been fine with him continuing to live with me, but he was really upset that I went through the process without him and broke up with me. Oh well, 6 years later, he is still renting with a new girlfriend, and now I have 100% equity by myself. That's life. Story 69. I was 17 and wanted much more freedom for myself than my parents were willing to give me, especially because I was already dating a man with a very bad public reputation who was twice my age for an entire year. Story 70. I prefer privacy because sometimes I just want to be at home without being pressured into a conversation or being told off for wanting some alone time, or being labeled a video game addict despite not gaming most of the time in my room. I am currently undergoing an autism diagnosis, which I suspect may relate to the fact that I easily feel drained when spending time around people and why I need a lot of time to myself. Since I moved to my accommodation, life has become much more pleasant, and I feel more productive since I can recharge properly. Story 71. I wanted space and control over that space. When you live with others, you can't really tell them anything unless something unusual occurs, and even then, it's a process to get them to change or to remove them from the environment. Story 72. Because there's nothing like having a home to yourself with your own rules. I thrive on being alone as if it were my superpower. People mess it up. Story 73. If I am by myself, I do not disappoint anyone or have to deal with any of their issues. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, and I do not have to worry about what anyone else thinks. Story 74. My dad is an amazing person who helps others. He has allowed many people to live with us, which has made the place messy. I need my own space. Story 75. I don't play well with others. It's not so much that I'm introverted, but I find that I enjoy my independence a little too much. My former roommates called me out on being easily annoyed whenever they needed favors. I admit this since I've only had one roommate I actually enjoyed. It was a huge house and we stayed out of each other's way. With everyone else, I felt like I was bending over backwards constantly whenever they wanted to be social or couldn't plan ahead. Story 76. I moved out of my home after finishing university. The choice to euthanize my cat, who had been suffering from gum disease, pushed me to actually move out. My mother had been encouraging me to find a place to rent for a while, but I wasn't going to leave my cat with her and my siblings while I lived in an apartment elsewhere. Seeing my cat die was the most I have ever cried in my life. A few weeks later, I was living in my first apartment, a single bedroom, not too far away. I've never had flatmates. I had a girlfriend stay with me for a short time, but later the landlord decided to sell the place a few years ago and made me a good offer. Now, I'm paying off the mortgage and still living by myself. My place isn't suitable for a cat, but the local cats like me, and I treat them well. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.